Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 7th, 2024. It has been 3,784 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 108 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 105 days since Russia expanded its war aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Thursday and Friday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are only minor map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There are only small changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, it won't hurt my feelings. I won't even know. 1. We maintain Russia's ongoing spring-summer offensive failed to achieve any of its operational goals after 47 days, and we further assess that Russian combat potential is declining. 2. The sharp increase in aggressive acts by the Russian Federation directed at the NATO alliance and its member nations is a direct result of the failed policy of de-escalation and excessive fear of Moscow's tactical nuclear threats. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 3. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 4. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's offer to negotiate a ceasefire based on the current line of conflict was not an overture made in good faith. It was meant to derail the upcoming June the 15th–16th peace conference in Switzerland, which more than 100 nations will attend. This is the last day for this entry. 5. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed 95% of its thermal power plant capacity, are a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March the 5th. 6. Ukrainian personnel shortages are extending deployment times, limiting troop rotations and forcing combat ineffective units to maintain defensive positions, which is contributing to Russia's ability to make small tactical advances in some areas of operation. This is the last day for this entry. 7. The quantity of artillery ammunition available to Ukrainian frontline units continues to increase and should reach a level sufficient to stabilize their defensive lines throughout the theater by the end of June. 8. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 9. Autocrat Putin has started the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense, led by the FSB, since Joseph Stalin's 1936–1938 purge. 10. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Russia conducted a large-scale air raid on Ukraine involving 4 Tu-95 strategic bombers that launched 5 Kh-101 and 555 cruise missiles and 53 Shahed-136 one-way drones. All 5 missiles and 48 of the Shahed UAVs were shot down. During the air raid, Poland scrambled F-16s, and the United States Air Forces deployed a KC-135 Stratotanker, which orbited near Lublin, Poland. In the Kharkiv Oblast, the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombed the bridge over the Oskil River in Senькova. Clouds obscured the area, so no satellite intelligence was available. The recreation area, previously used to house internally displaced civilians in Malinivka, was hit by an S-300 anti-aircraft missile used for a ground attack, the first S-300 strike in the Kharkiv Oblast since June 1st. There were no injuries. In the Donetsk Oblast, the VKS bombed the village of Bereztok, killing 1 person and wounding 3 more. A second bombing wounded another civilian. Russian forces shelled the settlement of New York, wounding 1 person and heavily damaging their home. A 59-year-old woman died in Chasiv Yar after the VKS dropped fuel-air explosives on the settlement, and a pensioner was injured. Russia shelled the previously damaged and closed epicenter hypermart in the city of Kherson, sparking another large fire at the building. Elsewhere in the Kherson Oblast, Russia shelled, targeted with drones, and bombed 13 settlements and villages and the city of Bereslav. 4 civilians were injured. At least 1 Shahed 136 one-way drone struck a critical infrastructure facility in the Bila Tserkva rayon of the Kyiv Oblast, sparking a large fire. We are withholding additional information to support operational security. The Nikopol rayon of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast was hit by artillery and rocket fire and targeted by one-way drones. 2 men were injured during a drone attack, and an 85-year-old woman was injured by artillery fire. Solar panels at one of the electrical generation stations were damaged. On the morning of June 6, a Shahed 136 one-way drone hit critical civilian infrastructure in the Khmelnytsky rayon, sparking a large fire. Last night's air raid targeted Starokostantinev, again, with the military airfield the likely target. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, directly addressed the critical situation with Ukraine's electrical grid and how it is impacting nuclear safety across Ukraine. Quote, "For the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, in particular, the external power situation remains extremely vulnerable, prone to frequent outages. But it is also a wider concern in the current circumstances, where a loss of off-site power event has the potential to be even more serious given the higher nuclear fuel temperatures for reactors in operation in Ukraine. We are continuing to follow the situation very closely." Unquote. Here is today's action report. Russia's spring-summer offensive is on its 48th day, with 111 assaults carried out on Wednesday and, at the time the podcast script was written, 73 attacks on Thursday. Through June 5th, the 7-day moving average for attacks dropped to 109, down from the May 17th peak of 136. The number of attacks by Russian forces continues to be below the linear trend line. The current trend indicates that Russian combat potential is being attrited, and the situation for Ukrainian forces is slowly improving. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. There have only been small changes since the last podcast. Ready? Here we go! Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipti-Vovchansk area of operation, or EO. Ukrainian forces continued offensive operations in Vovchansk and engaged in positional fighting north of Lipti. Russian forces are on active defense across the EO. Ukrainian forces continue to advance in the settlement, with the 36th Separate Marine Infantry Brigade capturing a squad of Russian soldiers. Russian mail blogger Anatoly Radov claimed that Russian troops were being rotated. In the Russian border village of Leninsky in the Belgorod Oblast, the Ukrainian 71st Yaga Brigade used first-person view one-way drones to destroy 2 Russian self-propelled howitzers. The firebase was located 160 meters from occupied civilian housing. In the Kupiansk EO, Russian forces made a small gain south of Vilshana in the direction of Petropavlivka. Based on the new intelligence, we adjusted the line of conflict. Russian forces also made marginal gains in Ivanivka, where fighting was ongoing. In In the Svatove AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued significant attacks from occupied Karmazynivka, attempting to advance in the direction of Druzhelyubivka, and, supported by the VKS, tried to advance on Myasozharivka. In the Kremina AO, Russian forces made another attempt to advance in the direction of Nevske and Terny. In the Serebryanka forest, fighting continued with no change in the situation. In the Siversk AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian attempts to advance on Bilogorivka from the southeast were unsuccessful. A very graphic geolocated video showed Russian troops continued to suffer heavy casualties, assaulting the same area using the same approaches for 19 months. East of Bilogorivka, in occupied Shepelivka, a Ukrainian one-way drone destroyed a Russian total motorcycle. You heard that right. A total motorcycle. You have to see it to believe it. The first 16 seconds of the video are almost cartoonish due to the size of the improvised armor, which makes the motorbike very top-heavy. We definitely link to the video in our almost daily situation report. There is more information in the podcast description on how you can become a subscriber. Russian troops carried out another wave of attacks from Zolotarivka in the direction of Verkhnyokamyensk that were unsuccessful. Finally, a Russian Tor-2 air defense system south of occupied Zmiivka on the PO7 highway was destroyed by a Ukrainian one-way drone. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Konstantinivka AO, heavy fighting continued on the eastern edges of Kalinivka, where Ukrainian troops made marginal gains. Fighting was still ongoing on the western edges of Ivanivska. Further south, fighting continued east of Klishchiivka with no change in the situation. Over the last 2 days, a herd of total tanks tried to advance from occupied Zelenopilya and Odradivka in the direction of Andriivka, and were destroyed by artillery, javelin and anti-tank-guided missiles, other ATGMs and one-way drones. We link to that video in the situation report too. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, the heaviest fighting continues to be in the Avdiivka AO, with Russian forces carrying out 28 attacks. Assaults continue to be carried out from occupied Ocheretine and Arkhangelsk in the directions of Kalinovo, Novoalexandrivka, Progress, Yevgenivka and Sokil. Ukrainian forces held their defensive lines, but the situation remains very difficult. Quick analysis. Instead of concentrating combat power in one or two directions, Russian forces appear to be attempting to stretch Ukrainian defensive lines to create a breakthrough in any direction. New York, Malinivka, Mirnograd or Selidove. Russian forces also continued their attempts to advance on Novopokrovsk and Novoselivka Persha without success. For the second day in a row, Russian mercenary Melblogovo Gonzo claimed that fighting continued east of the Karlovsky Reservoir and Vovcha River in the direction of Karlivka, with no change in the situation. There continues to be significant fog of war in the Vuhledar AO. In Krasnohorivka, the only thing we confidently report is that fighting continued in the southern part and eastern edges of the settlement. Russian claims that Georgiivka was captured are false. Ukrainian forces continue to defend Paraskoviivka, and Russian claims of reaching the eastern edge of Konstantinivka are also false. In the Staromlynivka AO, Russian forces carried out 8 attacks in the southern parts of Urozhaine and Staromayorsk, suffered losses and retreated. Russian and Ukrainian sources reported renewed fighting northwest of Priyudne in the direction of Novodarivka, with no change in the situation. An extremely graphic video that our editorial team has elected not to share showed that a Russian platoon, a total tank, an infantry fighting vehicle and a main battle tank were eliminated west of Novodonetsk. The Russians left their wounded behind, and after sunrise, a Ukrainian drone captured a video of a legless and burned Russian soldier still alive next to the destroyed tank. In the Orikhiveyo of the Zaporizhia Oblast, there was only positional fighting northwest of Verbove and in the remains of Robotyne. The IAEA provided an update on the status of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Inspectors reported they continued to hear explosions away from the site, but did not report if outgoing artillery fire was happening near the plant. 1 year after Russia destroyed the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, the cooling pond reservoir has dropped 1.5 meters, but still has an adequate supply to cool the plant as long as the reactors remain shut down. Director General Grossi told Rosatom head Alexei Likhachev that the NPP could not be restarted, quote, as long as nuclear safety and security remained in jeopardy due to the conflict. The IAEA team was allowed to inspect the 750 kV switchyard near the NPP and found there had been no progress to replace or repair components damaged in 2022. Inspectors walked the turbine hall for Reactor 6, but were not given full access. The online radiator monitors have been reconnected, with 3 of the 14 off-site stations offline due to damage sustained in 2022. Russian state energy company Rosatom said they intend to replace the sensors, and manual readings are being recorded. In the Kherson, the VKS bombed the settlement of Sadove with 7 OMPK glide bombs in 2 separate strikes, with one striking the Dnipro River, because of course one did. Russian sources claim a Ukrainian electronic warfare station was destroyed, but did not share any ISR video before or after the attack to back the claim. We link to the video that shows that the bombing hit something.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Am I to understand that Black Sea Fleet lost another boat? On the night of June the 5th and the 6th, the occupied port of Chornomorsk was attacked by Ukrainian Mahura Mach 5 Sea Baby uncrewed surface vessels. The Hur led the attack, destroying the anti-drone booms at the harbor entrance and sinking a Project 498 Saturn tugboat. Russia is currently engaged in unusual maneuvers with the remaining vessels of the Black Sea Fleet. Analyst H.I. Sutton shared satellite images on Twitter, also known as X. In the Russian port of Novorossiysk, 10 ships were moved from their docks and anchored at buoys within the bay. Another satellite image from Sentinel Hub EO browser captured 8 vessels at sea south of the Kerch Strait. The flotilla, which included 3 surface missile carriers capable of launching up to 24 caliber cruise missiles, entered the Sea of Azov. Here is my theater-wide update. Yesterday, during memorial services in Normandy, France, honoring the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy had a moment with a World War II veteran. The veteran, who uses a wheelchair and who has not been identified, forcibly grabbed Zelenskyy's hand to kiss it. Zelenskyy bowed down and the two embraced, with a hot mic capturing their exchange.
Oh, you're the savior of the people. Here's my eyes. Got a picture.
Yeah, you want a picture?
Not here.
No, you are our hero.
Not here. One of you. I pray for you.
According to Bloomberg, NATO Assistant Secretary General David Van Wil announced the alliance would be signing an agreement that would expand cooperation in the exchange and creation of defensive technology to counter Russia's electronic warfare capabilities. The agreement would focus on Russian GPS jamming, which has become a battlefield issue for Ukraine and a commerce issue for a number of European countries. In an interview with US news agency ABC News, US President Joe Biden created a new red line for Ukraine and called autocrat Vladimir Putin a threat.
Let me ask you about what Vladimir Putin said last night about this authorization of American weapons inside Russia. He said the supply of high-precision weapons to Ukraine for strikes on Russian territory is direct participation in this war. He went on to say that this is the way to serious problems and again talked about Russia's nuclear capabilities. Does that concern you?
I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator, and he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going. We're not talking about giving them weapons to strike Moscow, to strike the Kremlin, to strike just across the border where they're receiving significant fire from conventional weapons used by the Russians to go into Ukraine to kill the Ukrainians.
The Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia issued an arrest warrant for US citizen and sergeant of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Sarah Ashton Cirillo. She is accused of spreading propaganda and making the Russian Ministry of Defense have big feelings. Okay, I made that last part up. Was that propaganda? The International Federation for Human Rights sent a request to the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for Russian propagandists Margarita Simonyan, Vladimir Solovyov, Dmitry Kiselyov, Sergei Mardan, and government official Dmitry Medvedev. The IFHR argued that their actions qualify as crimes against humanity. The Foreign Minister for Hungary, Péter Szijjártó, confirmed that Budapest will attend the upcoming peace conference in Switzerland. Previously, the Moscow-leaning government said they would not participate. Quote, "We believe that if everyone were at the negotiating table, real results could be expected. This is not the case this time, but as we respect the peace efforts of the Swiss, we will participate." Unquote. The last part of today's podcast is the biggest news. Yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that Ukraine will receive Mirage 2000-5 fighter planes, and they will be operational by the end of 2024. Pilot training will start as soon as next week, and there were multiple reports in early 2023 that Ukrainian pilots and ground crews were already undergoing some training with the aircraft. We published an explainer video on our Patreon, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, Facebook and YouTube with more information. Macron also announced that France would train and fully equip a Ukrainian brigade, 4,500 troops. After the announcement, Macron told BFM-TV that when it comes to Ukraine using French weapons on Russia within its 1991 borders, quote, "the limit is set by the actions of Russians." Finally, Japan sent 101 vehicles to Ukraine, including Toyota High Mobility vehicles, tracked JGSDF cargo haulers, and Mitsubishi light trucks. Ukrainian troops prize right-hand drive vehicles because Russian drone operators target the left seat where a driver would normally sit. Well, normally in Ukraine and Russia. We love our listeners in the land of right-hand drive cars. And that's what we know. Join me next week, as even without power, I'll find a possibility to talk to you. Your support of my home Ukraine helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.